Good morning. Welcome to Chalice Unitarian Universalist Congregation. We are a community of diverse beliefs and experiences, nurturing the liberal religious spirit and united by our desire to grow in love and in service. Whoever you are, whomever you love, whatever your life's journey, you are welcome here. Whether you gather with us every Sunday, once or twice a year, or are with us this morning for the first time, we're so glad you are here. I'm Reverend Sharon Wiley, Chalice's minister. Our worship musician this morning is Justin Gray. Our tech team is David Ogwen and Dean Gadet. Our Zoom liaison is Cheryl Ogwen, and our chat host online is Susan Spoto. Grateful to everyone for helping out. Welcome to this Sunday worship service. Welcome to those of you here in the chapel at long last, and welcome to those of you watching live using Zoom. For those of you using Zoom, please notice on your Zoom menu that there's a chat button. I hope people are using it already to say hello. You're welcome to use the chat during the service. Just be sure that when you post that you've opened the little blue menu there to select everyone, so everyone can see what's being shared. And the chat host will help with that if there's struggles. I also want to name one of the big changes we're making, and we'll talk about it again later in the service, but there will be an opportunity to share joys and sorrows in the chat that will be spoken out loud here in the chapel. So that's new, so be thinking about that. I want to especially welcome those of you who are newcomers at Chalice this morning. Towards the end of the service, there will be a link in the chat box for adding your name to our email list. Our weekly email is the best way to get information about our online groups and activities. It is now also where you get the link to sign up to come on Sunday morning. So now, let's take a breath together.
We acknowledge that our service is taking place on the stolen territory of the Kumeyaay, meaning humans or people, and the Payamkawishim, meaning Western people. A land acknowledgement works to undo the intentional erasure of Indigenous people and to support the resilience and strength that all Indigenous people have shown. We acknowledge the original inhabitants as a first and critical step toward learning and working with Indigenous communities to secure meaningful partnership and inclusion in the stewardship and protection of their cultural resources and sacred homeland.
Now we light our chalice, the symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith. The flaming chalice was first used during World War II by the Unitarian Service Committee as a symbol of life-saving refuge for people fleeing persecution in Europe, something we maybe understand with fresh eyes recently. The Reverend Susan Frederick Gray, the president of the Unitarian Universalist Association, recently reminded us that the symbol of our faith is a symbol of resistance to Nazism and a symbol of safe passage for refugees. I'd like to invite Victoria Cagle to light our chalice this morning. The words of our call to worship this morning come from the Reverend Betts Winnicky, she of blessed memory. As we gather together this morning, may we learn to recognize and affirm the pieces of possibility, the bits of good we bring. May we encourage rather than control, love rather than possess, enable rather than envy, allowing our individual gifts to weave a patchwork of peace, the soft, deep blue of sensitivity and understanding, the red energy of creativity, the white heat of convictions, the risky, fragile green of new growth, the golden flashes of gratitude, the warm rose of love. Each of us is indispensable if we are to minister to a broken and wounded world. Together in our gathered diversity, we form the whole. So be it. You are invited to rise in body or spirit to join in singing hymn 100, Peace Like a River.
I've got peace like a river, I've got peace like a river, I've got peace like a river in my soul. I've got peace like a river, I've got peace like a river, I've got peace like a river in my soul. I've got joy like a fountain, I've got joy like a fountain, I've got joy like a fountain in my soul. I've got joy like a fountain, I've got joy like a fountain, I've got joy like a fountain in my soul. I've got love like an ocean, I've got love like an ocean, I've got love like an ocean in my soul. I've got love like an ocean, I've got love like an ocean, I've got love like an ocean in my soul. I've got pain like an arrow, I've got pain like an arrow, I've got pain like an arrow in my soul. I've got pain like an arrow, I've got pain like an arrow, I've got pain like an arrow in my soul. I've got tears like the raindrops, I've got tears like the raindrops, I've got tears like the raindrops in my soul. I've got tears like the raindrops, I've got tears like the raindrops, I've got tears like the raindrops in my soul. I've got strength like a mountain, I've got strength like a mountain, I've got strength like a mountain in my soul. I've got strength like a mountain, I've got strength like a mountain, I've got strength like a mountain in my soul.
Our Sunday worship is the shared spiritual practice of our community, and we tend to the congregation during this time by sharing and honoring our joys and sorrows. So now that we are doing multi-platform worship, we are changing how we share joys and sorrows. Joys and sorrows will be spoken out loud with your names, and then that part will be clipped from the recording of the service, so it will not become part of the recording on our YouTube channel. So this is for us to experience, those of us here on Sunday morning, here online, here in the chapel. Those of you in the chapel will write your joys and sorrows onto candle cards. We have those to hand out if you'd like one. And Cheryl will collect those when you're done filling them out, just raise them up. And those of you online, what you share in the chat box will be spoken out loud here in the chapel. So we have a few minutes of music, so we have time to think about if you have something you would like to share and to write that down. If you would like to send me a confidential note about your joy or sorrow, or to make a prayer request, please email me. My email address will be in the chat box, and those of you here can get it from me after the service. The Girl Who Never Made Mistakes by Mark Pett and Gary Rubenstein, illustrated by Mark Pett. For Beatrice Bottomwell, Friday began like any other day. She matched her socks, and of course, she put her shoes on their proper feet. She remembered to feed her hamster, Humbert, his favorite food, broccoli. And when she made a sandwich for her brother Carl's lunch, she used exactly the same amount of peanut butter as jelly. When she stepped outside to greet her fans, she didn't forget to say good morning and thank you. They asked if she made her bed. She had. They asked if she forgot to do her math homework. Nope. What about tonight's talent show, they asked. I'm ready, said Beatrice with a smile. After all, her juggling act had won 3 years in a row. Most people in town didn't even know Beatrice's name. They just called her the Girl Who Never Makes Mistakes, because for as long as anyone could remember, she never did. Unlike Beatrice, Carl made lots of mistakes. He ate his crayons and drew with his green beans. He danced with his hands and played the piano with his feet. Carl loved to make mistakes. At school, Beatrice was on a cooking team with her 2 best friends, Millie and Sarah. To make their giant rhubarb muffins, they needed 4 eggs. Beatrice went to the refrigerator and carefully chose the biggest, eggiest eggs she could find. But on the way back, her legs slipped out from under her. The eggs went flying. Beatrice was about to make her first mistake. But she didn't. That was close, thought Beatrice. Sorry, Beatrice, I dropped a piece of rhubarb. Unfortunately. For the rest of the school day, Beatrice could not stop thinking about her almost mistake. On her way home from school, Beatrice watched Millie and Sarah ice skating in the park. Come join us, said Millie. It's fun, said Sarah. Beatrice watched them slip and slide on the frozen pond. Millie and Sarah laughed as they wobbled on the ice. No thanks, said Beatrice. At supper, Beatrice barely touched her food. Is everything all right, kiddo? Asked her father. I'm worried I'll mess up tonight, said Beatrice, and everyone will be watching. Worry? You don't make mistakes, he said with a smile. Beatrice tried to smile too. After supper, Beatrice got ready for the talent show. First, she woke Humbert up from his nap. Next, she got the salt shaker from the kitchen table. Finally, she filled a balloon with water. The school auditorium was packed. Beatrice felt her stomach jumping around inside her. Beatrice waited for her juggling music to begin. That's her, that's the girl who never makes mistakes, said a woman. Oh, we know she'll be perfect, said a man. When the music started, she tossed Humbert into the air. Next, she added the salt shaker, and finally the water balloon. Beatrice didn't miss a beat. The crowd clapped with delight. But Beatrice noted something odd about the salt shaker. The specks falling out of it were not white. Achoo! Humbert was so surprised by his sneeze that he grabbed the water balloon with his claws. Kablooey! Humbert, pieces of water balloon, and the pepper rained down on top of Beatrice. For the first time in as long as anyone could remember, Beatrice made a mistake. And it was a big one. The music stopped. Beatrice didn't know what to do. Cry? Run off the stage? The crowd sat stunned. They couldn't believe that the girl who never makes mistakes made a mistake. Beatrice looked at Humbert. He looked back at her. His hamster fur was soaked and speckled with bits of balloon. Beatrice let out a giggle. The giggle grew into a chuckle, and the chuckle became a laugh. The people in the crowd looked at each other and then back at Beatrice. They began to giggle, then chuckle, then finally roar with laughter. Beatrice and the audience laughed until they couldn't remember why they were laughing. That night, Beatrice slept better than she ever had. In the morning, no fans greeted Beatrice. When she got dressed, Beatrice, for no reason at all, put a polka dot sock on one foot and a plaid sock on the other. Beatrice made sandwiches. This time they put the peanut butter and jelly on the outside. They called it an inside-out PB&J. Lunch was messy and delicious. Later, Beatrice found Millie and Sarah skating in the park. They fell a lot and laughed. Now, people no longer call her the girl who never makes mistakes. They just call her Beatrice.
Well, I think for me, the notion of the divided life began with just my own experience growing from childhood into adolescence into young adulthood and right to where I am today. It seems to me that as human beings, we are born whole, integral, with no distinction between what's going on inside us and what's going on outside us. I mean, an infant is able to turn on a dime emotionally. What you see is what you get. Rage one moment, joy the next moment. There's no governor in there saying, in order to keep myself safe or acceptable in the external world, I better cover up this feeling and express this other feeling. And I think that sense of wholeness about infants and young people is one of the reasons why we love being around them. This is what it means to be a real human being. And there's a joy in seeing that. And there's also a kind of wistfulness, I think, that happens in adults that is around the question, whatever happened to me? How did I lose that integral quality, that capacity to be here as I really am? And as we think about our lives, I think the answer becomes pretty clear. For some kids, it happens sadly in the family. For most of us, it happens at school. We learn at some point that it's not safe to be in the world as who we truly are. That if we express our true feelings, our true identity, we're going to get marginalized. We're going to get ignored. We're going to become invisible, or we're going to be disliked or even hated. I think gay and lesbian young men and women can tell you about that pretty vividly, but we all have our own version of that, where there are pieces of us that we don't dare bring into the world for fear that something bad's going to happen to us. So we try to get by, we try to pass, we try to play a role that's acceptable. But then there comes a point in life when that divided life, that gap between who we really are and the face we put on for the larger world becomes painful. It doesn't happen for everybody. Some people adjust to it. Some people live their whole lives that way. But for a lot of people, the divided life becomes a source of pain, and we have to find some way to try to close that gap, to build a bridge between our own identity and integrity as adults and the work that we do in the world. I'm 72 years old, and I think every now and then about the fact that I am a mortal being who will at some point die. You think about that in your 70s in a way you don't in your 30s, 40s, and 50s. And it's often come to me that I can't imagine any sadder way to die than with a feeling that I never showed up in this world as my true self. But I can't imagine any more satisfying way to go out than to be able to say, to the best of my ability, in the work I did, in the relationships I held, in the associations I had, and in the activities I engaged in, I was there as who I am. I was there with my best gifts. I was there with a sense of possibility. I was there with my own struggle and my own suffering. I was there honestly and truly and real in 3 dimensions.
This year, we're studying the proposed 8th principle of Unitarian Universalism, and several of my sermons are looking at phrases and ideas from that principle to help us better consider the depth and meaning of the wording. The wording begins with these words: we covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness. And today we're looking at that phrase, journeying towards spiritual wholeness. Now, I need to begin by telling you that the phrase journey toward wholeness has a specific history in Unitarian Universalism. And the inclusion of this phrase in the 8th principle is deliberately referencing that history. From 1996 through 2002, the phrase journey toward wholeness referred specifically to an anti-racism program offered through the Unitarian Universalist Association. There was a Journey Toward Wholeness curriculum, the Journey Toward Wholeness office and staff of the UUA, and some UU congregations still have Journey Toward Wholeness groups and Journey Toward Wholeness Sundays to lift up anti-racist multicultural work. So the first UU church I joined had a Journey Toward Wholeness group. And as you might imagine from the name, I had absolutely no idea what that group could possibly be about. Journey toward wholeness, what does it mean? It's beautiful and metaphorical language, but it's not the kind of phrase that gets people to attend meetings, that's for sure. I belonged to that congregation for several years before I understood that the Journey Toward Wholeness group was about racial justice work. So don't get me wrong, I like the phrase. It points to a great truth, actually, that all of us are harmed by living in a white supremacist culture, and all of us have work to do to move toward healing. I think the toward is so important. We move toward wholeness, because how can we fully heal from a brokenness, from injustice that is still all around us? Still hurting people, still killing BIPOC people. We cannot heal wounds that are still being inflicted. I have referred many times over the years to our broken and hurting world, speaking in metaphor, speaking spiritually, words that can be hard to define. I don't think we can talk about wholeness without talking about brokenness. These concepts of brokenness and wholeness don't come strongly from one particular religious tradition. The most direct connection comes from the Jewish tradition and the concept of tikkun olam, which means to repair the world. Tikkun olam comes from a rabbinic teaching, and it has come to connote social action, community service, and social justice. The work of repair, tikkun olam, is more external than it is internal. Work we go out into the world to do. It doesn't necessarily speak to our individual wounds, nor our individual yearnings for wholeness, whatever they may be. My research suggests that brokenness, the concepts of brokenness and wholeness, have come into predominance in the last few decades, especially. And I suspect that's because these words speak to something very modern. It's not that these ideas haven't existed before, but I think they give name to something that is otherwise very difficult for us to articulate. So the first thing to ask is, of course, what is broken? What is it that needs healing, repair, mending? I've mentioned already racism, white supremacy, but any of us here could make a list, couldn't we? An enormous list of what's broken. The question feels overwhelming. After 2 years of pandemic, after the Trump presidency, after the resurgence of white nationalism in our country, after the attempted overthrow of our government, after Russia attacking Ukraine, to the litany of pain and despair in our world, let us add that surely too our hearts are broken. Every advance of technology and industry is initially a celebration of progress. The potential for human accomplishment seems at times limitless. But what we continue to learn about ourselves, about humanity, is that we are capable of taking extraordinary technology and using it to hurt each other. That we are capable of atrocities that continue to be too horrible to contemplate. That our potential for evil is as great as our potential for good. And that awareness, our awareness of the human potential for evil, can never go away. We can't not know what we know. Yeah, perhaps our hearts are broken. Possibly too now, our spirits are broken just a bit. The pandemic that has gone on and on, our hopes for herd immunity disappointed, loved ones gone, our hopes for vacations canceled, our hopes for time with family tentative, cautious. Our hopes that the pandemic is coming to a close, subdued. We have been hopeful before, and we have learned restraint. And perhaps too, the flotsam and jetsam of everyday living breaks us at times, 1,000 paper cuts to the soul. The first death of a loved one, then the next, the rejection of a friend, the disapproval of a boss, the cut in benefits, the job loss, chest pains, our sense that we are unlovable, that there is perhaps something wrong with us in every possible way. Perhaps it is our souls that collapse and shatter under the weight of just living. That simple phrase, life's journey toward wholeness, suggests that this is a journey we all take. I expect that each of you here in the room and here online, know something of brokenness. I think the vividness of being broken comes and goes in our lives, but brokenness itself is always there. All it takes is a news story or a friend in hard times or a personal tragedy, and we crack again. Our hearts, our spirits, our souls, we break and heal all our lives long. Friends, we are born crying, not laughing. And perhaps that's what the whole journey toward wholeness is about. An acknowledgement that wholeness is elusive, an ever receding horizon, a hope that keeps us moving forward, a beauty that inspires and mesmerizes. Wholeness, what does it mean? I can tell you from my own experience, and you know this too, that some wounds heal even some very old wounds. People do change. We grow in our compassion, our forgiveness, our empathy. Others grow in compassion and forgiveness and empathy too. I have had old and broken friendships heal and revive when an apology is offered and accepted. I have witnessed family discord disappear in the face of illness and death. I've seen people I thought would never change. Brokenness can be repaired. It doesn't mean that there's not a scar where the wound was, that the pain never happened, but it means that wounds can heal. And I can tell you from my own experience, and you know this too, that some wounds don't heal. Sometimes people change and sometimes they don't. Sometimes I'm the one who can't change, who can't forgive, who can't move on. There are some hurts I carry like an infection in my otherwise gentle heart. I wrestle with that ugliness that I want to let go of, but I can't quite yet. I can forgive almost anything you might do to hurt me, but I find it hard to forgive actions that hurt my loved ones. That is my spiritual work, my brokenness, my journey toward wholeness. No, some wounds don't heal and we carry them with us, open and sore, our cracked hearts bleeding, or maybe they're just scabbed over, still vulnerable to friction and pressure. Wholeness, what does it mean? Some define wholeness as the integration of body, mind, and spirit. Living a life of integrity where what we think matches what we do, matches how we feel. In that same vein, educator and author Parker Palmer, who you heard earlier, defines wholeness as living a life that is congruent with your inner truth. Some make a connection between the word wholeness and the word holiness, a state of completeness or perfection that is synchronous with life's abundance, beauty, and many gifts. Perhaps wholeness is our ability to recognize life's abundance, beauty, and many gifts, even as we experience life's brokenness. Researcher Brené Brown writes about living wholeheartedly. She writes, wholehearted living is about engaging in our lives from a place of worthiness. It means cultivating the courage, compassion, and connection to wake up in the morning and think, no matter what gets done and how much is left undone, I am enough. I think all these shades of wholeness are there in the eighth principle, lives of integrity, truth, holiness, worthiness. And I think there is at least one more, the wholeness of our interconnection, our interdependence, the wholeness of our Unitarian Universalist community, the wholeness of our Unitarian Universalist communities. It is easy for our sense of wholeness to break. One careless word, a difficult conversation, a severe disagreement, and what felt whole, safe, and inviting can suddenly feel uncertain, lonely, and unknown. All communities are like this. All human interaction is like this. We journey toward wholeness because wholeness is slippery and hard and elusive and beautiful. I want to end with the words that called us to worship this morning. As we gather together this morning, may we learn to recognize and affirm the pieces of possibility the bits of good we bring. May we encourage rather than control, love rather than possess, enable rather than envy, allowing our individual gifts to weave a patchwork of peace, the soft, deep blue of sensitivity and understanding, the red energy of creativity, the white heat of convictions, the risky, fragile green of new growth, the golden flashes of gratitude, the warm rose of love. Each of us is indispensable. If we are to minister to a broken and wounded world, together in our gathered diversity, we form the whole. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen. You are invited to rise in body or spirit to join in singing.
Come thou fount of every blessing, tune our hearts to sing thy grace. Streams of mercy never ceasing, call for songs of loudest praise. While the hope of life's perfection fills our hearts with joy and love, teach us ever to be faithful. May we still thy goodness prove. Come thou fount of every vision, lift our eyes to what may come. See the lion and the young lamb dwell together in thy home. Hear the cries of woeful silent, feel our love glow like the sun. When we all serve one another, then our heaven is begun. Come thou fount of inspiration, turn our lives to higher ways. Lift our gloom and desperation, show the promise of this day. Help us find ourselves in union, help our hands tell of our love. With thine aid, O fount of justice, earth be fair as heaven above.
The Sunday offering is an expression of the generosity that makes congregational life possible. As Buddhist teacher Sharon Salzberg writes, generosity is characterized by the inner quality of letting go or relinquishing, being able to let go, to give up, to renounce, to give generously. These capacities spring from the same source within us. When we practice generosity, we open to all of these liberating qualities simultaneously. Please text your donation to Chalice. If you haven't texted a donation before, know that once you text the amount, you'll get a reply with a link to follow to enter your credit card information. And if you've already entered that information previously when you've donated, you don't need to enter it again. If your Sunday donation is part of your pledge payment, please be sure to indicate the word pledge after the dollar amount. And also know that you can make a text donation anytime. It doesn't need to be only during the worship hour. So the phone number will be on screen in a moment. It will also be in the chat box for those of you online. Please give generously. Please join in dedicating our offering with words of affirmation. As Unitarian Universalists, we gather to affirm and promote acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations.
Look at me and tell me who I am, why I am, what I am. Call me a fool and it's true I am. I don't know who I am. It's such a shame. I'm such a sham. No one knows who I am. Am I the face of the future? Am I the face of the past? Am I the one who must finish last? Look at me and tell me who I am, why I am, what I am. Will I survive? Who will give a damn if I don't know who I am? Nobody knows, not even you. No one knows who I am. Good and evil and their merits, men have argued through history as well they should. My philosophy, any child can see, good is evil and therefore all evil is good. How do you tell evil from good? Evil does well, good not so good. Evil's the one that they tell you to shun, good is the one to embrace. Say that and Satan will laugh right in your face. Good men maintain evil's a curse, but it is plain good's even worse. Evil's the one that they tell you to shun, good is the one to embrace. Say that and Satan will laugh right in your face. The battle between good and evil goes back to the start. Can't believe in the apple falling apart. The key thing about good and evil, each man has to choose. Heaven and hell is a hell of a gamble to lose. But as evil rules this world we abuse, it's hell that we choose, and heaven must lose. Evil is everywhere, good doesn't have a prayer. Good is commendable, evil's expendable. Evil is viable, good's unreliable. Evil is bankable, evil is bankable. Evil for me, you can have good. Doesn't suit me to be Robin Hood. It's easier by far than the way that things are to remain good and evil than try to be evil. And
I'd like to invite a time of silence just to hold our grief for the continuing attacks on the people of Ukraine and for all the war and violence in our world. Blessed be. You're invited to rise again in body or spirit to join in singing one of our great favorites.
Below me, I feel no motion, standing on these mountains and plains, far away from the rolling ocean. Still my dry land heart can say, I've been sailing all my life now, never harbor or port have I known. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue boat home. Sun, my sail, and moon, my rudder, as I fly the starry sea, leaning over the edge in wonder, casting questions into the deep, drifting here with my ship's companions, all we kindred pilgrim souls, making our way by the lights of the heavens in our beautiful blue boat home. I give thanks to the waves upholding me, hail the great winds urging me on, breathe the infinite sea before me, sing the sky my sailor's song. I was born upon the fathoms, never harbor or port have I known. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue boat home.
Before we close the service, I'd like to remind newcomers online to please use the link in the chat box to add your name to our email list. Our closing words come from the Reverend Maureen Killeran. No matter how weak or frightened we may feel, we each have gifts that can make a difference in the world. In this coming week, may you do at least one thing to support the broken, to welcome the stranger, to celebrate what is worthy, to do the work of justice and love. Be strong, be connected. Each day act so you may be a little more whole. Blessed be. Go ahead. Love and blessings to each of you. You're invited to close our time together by singing the well, and then please stay put, sit back down, because we have a few announcements, and after the announcements, everyone is invited to coffee hour, either in person or online.